Welcome to iCatConnect 2025, the virtual event for everyone working with and for unowned cats across the world. We're delighted that so many of you are joining us live today to explore the challenges you face and the ways we can overcome them together. This year, we've put your voices at the heart of the programme, focusing on the challenges you've told us about and showcasing the inspiring initiatives that you've created so others can learn from and follow your example. We're joined by expert panellists live in the studio today, ready to answer your questions, so please join in the conversations. We really want to hear from you. Over the course of the day, we'll be looking at the many different aspects of cat population management, offering practical hints and tips for TNR, exploring how veterinary teams can make neutering more accessible, and we're even going to tackle the emotive topic of euthanasia, focusing on the positive message of how we can work differently to reduce the need for end-of-life decisions. For those of you who joined us last year, welcome back. And if this is your first iCatConnect, it's lovely to have you here today. We hope you leave feeling informed, inspired, and equipped with ideas to improve the lives of unowned cats in your community.
Hello everyone, I'm Paul Marvell, Director of Global Programmes at Battersea, and on behalf of Battersea, I'm honoured to welcome you to iCatConnect 2025. It's a privilege to support this important gathering for the second consecutive year, bringing together passionate, skilled and dedicated professionals working to improve the lives of cats across the globe. At Battersea, our mission to be here for every dog and cat extends far beyond the animals in our centres. Through our global programme strategy, we partner with organisations across the UK and internationally to help improve welfare outcomes on a global scale. This year alone, we awarded 12 grants to rescues and welfare organisations in 5 countries, benefiting over 33,000 cats. One example of our work, and a really exciting one, is our partnership with iCatCare through our Global Enabler Grant Programme. This initiative is designed to support organisations driving meaningful, lasting change through innovation and collaboration. Together, we're demonstrating the power of strategic partnership, combining shared values, practical tools, and expert insights to elevate standards, strengthen community engagement, and improve advocacy efforts. Cat population management is a major focus for Battersea, both within our centres and through our grant programmes. The challenges facing the unowned cat sector are complex and global. Economic instability, limited veterinary capacity, and the growing number of cats on the streets and in shelters. Tackling these challenges calls for collective action, working together to build resilient systems and advance lasting, impactful solutions. That's why this conference matters. It's a space to share, to learn, to build collaborative solutions. I encourage each of you to be open and curious, share your successes and your setbacks, ask questions, offer ideas, because the more we connect, the more we can achieve together. We hope you leave this event inspired, equipped with practical insights, and energized to apply them in your work with unowned cats. Thank you for being part of this vital cause, and thank you for everything you do.
Welcome to iCatConnect 2025. We are live here and up and running. Your Unowned Community Cat event. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Nicola and Paul for the fantastic introduction to this event. And thank you wherever you are out there in YouTube land, watching us, joining us and participating in this event. Today is going to be a fantastic day. We have a lot of really interesting discussions and topics to cover. We have 3 panel sessions. The first one is going to be about overcoming challenges, the challenges that you face, that I face, that all of us working in cat population management face. So we're going to have a panel here that I'll be chairing to discuss some of the common challenges and see how we might want to overcome them. We then have the next panel, and that is going to be about end-of-life decision-making, a really tough conversation to have, but one that we think is super important. And then the last panel of the day is going to be about veterinary perspectives for TNR, another really interesting and valuable topic. And throughout the day, that's going to be interspersed with videos, with reflections, experts on Zoom and live here in the studio with us discussing these things, as well as your comments and your questions. And talking about that, if you look on where you're looking now at me on YouTube and this event, the comments section, please engage with us. First of all, tell us where you're from. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Secondly, ask any questions or post any comments. We really want to engage with you. We've got people behind the scenes, the iCat Care team, who are ready to answer your questions. During the panel sessions, there'll be opportunity to ask questions or post comments to the panel that myself and Sev will be looking at throughout the session and throughout the day. So we'll hopefully be able to get to some of your questions as well, post them to the panel. So do engage. This is an event for you. So really, really excited to hear from you and talk about the things that are important to you. So let's start the day, shall we? I'm going to introduce the first video of the day, and it hopefully frames what we're going to be talking about today for a little bit. At International Cat Care, we always try and consider the bigger picture, and we talk about this a lot. We try and work upstream as much as we work downstream, and it's a balancing act as well as balancing cat populations. So let's have a look into that a little bit now and run the first video, and I'll see you on the other side of it. Imagine you're walking by a river, like this one, when suddenly you hear meowing and yowling and splashing and see a cat floating downstream. You jump in, you scoop it up, and you bring it to safety. And just as you get back to shore, you hear the sound of another cat in the water. Again, you jump into the river and rescue that cat as well. But then another cat, and another cat, and another cat drift into view. Before long, there's this steady stream of cats struggling against the current, floating downstream. Maybe more people start to arrive and rush to help, pulling them out one by one. Now you've got all of these wet, rescued cats on the riverbank. Maybe some people set up feeding stations for them, and others are building shelters so that the cats can be put somewhere dry and safe. Maybe veterinarians arrive to tend to any sick and injured ones. And while all of these people are feeding cats and filling shelters and tending to those that are sick and injured, more cats just continue to float downstream. But then suddenly one person climbs out of the water and leaving everybody else behind. Somebody yells out, "Where are you going?" And the person shouts back, "I'm going upstream to see who keeps throwing all of these cats in the river." Think about the work that you do. How much of it is reactive, responding to a crisis, firefighting and solving problem after problem, day after day, jumping into the river to save a drowning cat? Now imagine all of the other different branches and tributaries and streams connected and flowing to and from that river. And imagine how many cats are floating down those other routes, and how many other people are doing exactly the same thing as you, pulling those cats out of their part of the river day after day. Historically, the animal welfare sector has been much more about reacting and responding to problems than preventing them, working downstream far more than we work upstream. It's easy enough to understand why. It's more tangible to work downstream. When there's a cat in front of you, you're going to help it, aren't you? We're accustomed to dealing with emergencies, doing something that has a result right now, as opposed to doing something that might have an impact sometime in the future. It's just easier to comprehend and to care about. But the thing about working reactively is that unless we do push upstream, unless we find a way of breaking the cycle and changing the system, we will forever be pulling cats out of the river. And as we go upstream, that's where we start to see where the cats are coming from. Maybe some are being abandoned and just left by the river. Maybe some are intentionally thrown in, and while others just end up living and breeding on the riverbank until there's just too many of them, and maybe some simply fall in. Now, as animal welfare groups and organisations, we can't all be working upstream. While some people are preventing problems from happening, there will always need to be people reacting and responding to them when they inevitably still do. But upstream and downstream aren't two separate destinations. They're a continuum, and there are countless points along the river between the two. And the work that we do can be at any point and has value wherever it is. We just have to be honest about what we're doing and the impact we're having, or hope to have. Cats are always going to need saving from rivers, but upstream is where we stop fighting this endless tide, where we can stop cats from ending up in the river in the first place. At International Cat Care, this idea of pushing upstream is central to our work, always trying to see the bigger picture, addressing those root causes, looking for the connections and the context that help us to understand what a balanced cat population is, so that we can start making real lasting change for cats everywhere.
Hi, I'm Jenny. What does a balanced cat population look like? It's not just about numbers, it's about connections. Owned cats, unowned cats, including cats in shelter. They don't live in isolation. What happens in one population ripples into another. And unless we look at that bigger picture, we risk treating the symptoms of welfare problems instead of the causes. And it's also about context. There can never be an ideal number of cats everywhere. It depends on whether those cats can have their needs met, and that depends on people, other animals, and the environments they live in. For me, that truth comes alive through one cat, Mac. Mac once had a home. We know because he loved nothing more than curling up on a lap. But somehow he ended up alone, scavenging scraps in the countryside, fighting other cats, and eventually catching FIV. He was finally trapped by Cornwall Cats Protection, neutered, cared for, and one day he came home, to my home. Mac lived many happy years with me as a treasured part of our family. But his story wasn't just about him. It reveals the links between populations. If he'd been neutered earlier, or if his original owners had been supported, or if he was cared for in the community when he did stray, his whole journey could have been different. Along the way, he touched countless people. He also drew on resources. He was shaped by every environment he passed through. One cat living in many different worlds. And this situation is not unique. With over 11 million cats in the UK, the combined impact of these journeys is significant. And that's why we can't talk about cat welfare without talking about cat populations. Because what's best for one cat depends on the community, the context, the balance between these things. At Cats Protection, our research team has developed a framework to help us understand that balance. Not just the physical and psychological well-being of cats, but also how they interact with people, other animals, and the wider environment, including sustainability. And all this depends on that wider context, socio-economic factors, ecosystems, and the realities of modern life. A rural farming community faces very different challenges from an urban neighbourhood. In some areas, we see issues of unowned cats. In others, the real challenge is helping owners meet the needs of cats they already have. That's why our approach must be adaptable. What works in one community may not be right in another. And that's where our people are amazing helping cats across the UK. So now I'd love you to hear from two of our fantastic volunteers, Kirsty and Kathy, who not only support our research, but are also on the front lines, making a difference for lives for cats, for where they live.
Hi, I'm Kirsty from Arbroath Cats Protection up in the northeast of Scotland. So as you can see, we are in quite a rural setting, and this means that some of our cats include feral colonies, which means that we need to have the support and the understanding of local farmers, people who live in the countryside, those who work with the countryside. We also need to have an understanding of how our cats and indeed the people who look after them, how they interact with the environment around them and how they interact with the countryside. So as we know, in shelters, all of us are faced with the consequences of people not neutering their cats. However, when we are dealing with feral colonies, for example, we're dealing with slightly different situations. We have a feral colony that is out on a large farm, and the reason the colony was so big to start with was because the farmers used to pick up the dead baby livestock and put it in a container, which the cats then used to eat. The colony obviously grew because there was an abundance of food, but then the farmers did away with this. They closed the container so that the cats could no longer eat this food. The farmers also had pest control in to get rid of normal rodents that you would find on a farm. So once they got rid of their dead livestock, the feral cats suddenly found that they didn't have enough food. So we can see how basically the humans' actions in this case have a huge impact on the feral colony. So thankfully we were called in, and we have some amazing volunteers who go up to this farm in all sorts of weathers in Scotland and put out food. So they take part in trap, neuter, return, but also go up every day to feed the feral cats. So to put out wet food for them and dry food for them, and put out enough stock as well to last them over if for any reason the weather is such that the volunteers can't make it up to feed them. So in this case, obviously our ability to look after these feral cats depends hugely on buy-in from the farmers, from the people who live around the area. Apparently there are some homes as well where people live, and they've been very accommodating for cats protection. But obviously we need to have the farmers agree to us go onto their land to provide food for the cats, and basically ensure that we are maintaining the cat's welfare while also not interrupting any of the everyday life of the farm. And the cats are actually quite used now to the activities on the farm and the busier times in the farm as well.
Hi, my name is Kathy, and I volunteer at Cats Protection Scotland Cat Centre, located north of Glasgow. Kirsty has given some really good insight as to the challenges of working in a rural environment. However, the urban environment has its own set of challenges. There's less green space, so it could affect the ability of cats to express their natural behaviors. More people live in flats than they do houses, which leads to a higher density of both cats and people, which could in turn lead to conflict between the two, be it cats toileting in other people's gardens, people having to witness their hunting behavior, or indeed having to listen to two unneutered toms fighting in the middle of the night. In the case of Glasgow and the surrounding areas, there are high areas of both social and economic deprivation, as can be seen on the map in red. Combined with the current cost of living crisis, it could affect the public's ability to adopt a cat, seek veterinary care, or doing something as simple as getting their cat neutered. Over the last 20 months, we've admitted nearly 800 owned and unowned cats into care. Many owners are reluctant to relinquish their cats, often leaving the centre in floods of tears. However, the pressures of modern life, be it personal or financial, often leave them thinking that they have no other choice. As you can see, some of the more common reasons for cats coming into our care are due to conflict in the home, be it with other animals or children. It could be the cat becomes ill and they can't afford the veterinary treatment. Or people are forced to leave their home and they're unable to bring it with them. If we can direct people to assistance, be it low-cost veterinary care, offering behavioral advice or vouchers for neutering or microchipping, or even pointing people towards a food bank that also provides pet food, we can slow the movement of cats into our care and possibly even prevent some of it from happening, which leads to a better outcome for the people, the cats, and for the staff who would be the ones to end up looking after them. All cats that come into care must meet a minimum standard of veterinary care before they're rehomed, including neutering kittens between the ages of 9 to 10 weeks if it's medically safe to do so. If the cats ultimately do come into care, but they've had veterinary treatment while in the home, the time spent with us before they are fit to home is much less, which leads to a much better outcome for the welfare of the cat. We're very lucky in the Central Belt of Scotland that we have some fantastic volunteer-run lost and found groups on social media. These volunteers are available to scan cats for microchips, give advice on how to use a paper collar, or suggest to the community the best way to determine whether a cat is feral, community a cat, or whether it's just an owned cat out for a wander and maybe looking for a second or third dinner. Because of this, that means when we take an unowned cat into care, we can be reassured that everything has been done to find out if that cat has an owner first, and if not, that it was appropriate to bring the cat into care at all. Being a part of this focus group has really helped me see the much larger picture with regards to cat welfare and all the ways that cats cross our paths on their life journey. It's often said that it takes a village to raise a child, but it also takes a village to ensure that our cats are living their best lives and in the manner that's best suited to them.
Thank you, Kirsty and Kathy, for showing us some of the real challenges cats face and why community thinking is just so vital. At Cats Protection, this research is ongoing, but it's shifting us from asking, what's the right number of cats, to something bigger. How do we make sure the population is balanced? And by that we mean that every cat receives the care and support they need at each stage of their life, ensuring good health and welfare, both for individual cats and the wider cat population. And understanding that this will vary across locations, communities and cultures, and depend on that dynamic relationship between cats, their environment, people and other animals also. And while this looks different in every place, here in the UK, we're continuing to improve our understanding to bring that vision to life step by step. Thank you for watching.
Listening to Harry and then Jenny, Kirsty and Kathy helps us to consider the bigger picture of what we're all trying to achieve and where our work fits in. Where do you work? Upstream or downstream? Or a bit of both? Do you consider how cats move from one population to another? How can you better support the cats in your care by understanding how they came to be with you and what might have happened to support them earlier in their lives in a different way? Take a moment to reflect.
Welcome back. iCatConnect 2025. We're back in the studio now, about to start our first panel session, but already a lot to think about, a lot to reflect on. Listening to a purring cat is a very, very good way of reflecting on the things that we've just heard about. Before we start the panel session, also just want to remind you again, let us know where you're from. Use that comment section, ask questions, post comments. We do want to hear from you. This is your event after all. And obviously, if there are any questions that come in during the panel session, this one or the ones later today, we want to be able to answer your questions as well. So please don't forget to engage. It's time for the first panel, overcoming challenges. And so the way we went around this panel is we asked a lot of people that work in cat population management, people like you out there facing the same challenges. In fact, probably even some of you who are watching this were people that we asked, and they sent in videos and vox pops and posed the challenges that they frequently come across. And so we got some really, really interesting responses, and we're going to talk about some of those with the panel. So the first thing to do, I guess, is to introduce the panel that we have today. So I'm joined in the studio by Ursula and Jenny, who you will have seen from the video that was just on. And then on Zoom, we're joined by Sam and Nat and Stacey. And it's really exciting. We have a real global presence today in this panel. Jenny, UK, Ursula from Denmark, Stacey in the US, Nat from the Caribbean in Grenada, and Sam in Sri Lanka. And so really amazing global presence, really interesting to see how this reflects on the challenges. So I guess we should get started with the panel. First of all, thank you for joining us at iCatConnect 2025. And let's see what that first video is, that first challenge, that first Vox Pop.
Hello, my name is Manuela Rollings, and in my experience, one of the biggest challenges in cat population management is the lack of responsibilities taken by local municipalities for unowned cats. Unlike dogs, cats often fall into legally grey area, which means they're excluded from public animal welfare programs. It leads to underfunding of trap neuter return initiatives, minimal support for caregivers, and no strategic planning to reduce the overpopulation. Without municipal involvement, efforts remain fragmented and rely heavily on NGOs and volunteers, making sustainable impact nearly impossible.
Hello, my name is Sofia. The biggest challenge we face in our work in San Miguel Islands is that we don't have any single municipality that supports the TNR program. This difficulty in establishing municipal protocols within the TNR project in the island is for sure our biggest challenge. And our main goal is the mass sterilization of stray animals. The method we use is called trap neutering return, and based in organized capture of stray cats, their sterilization, treatment, release, and feeding. Without this institutional support for the implementation of the TNR program in our cities, it becomes less effective and reaches fewer animals, despite all the efforts of our team. So, we hope this will change soon.
Thank you, Manuela and Sophia, for telling us about that challenge, something that I'm sure is familiar to a lot of people that are listening and watching this today. Getting local municipalities to take responsibility for unowned cats. It is a tough challenge and a really important one. So that's the first one we're going to ask the panel today. So the first question, apart from the UK, we know that most countries, national, local and municipal governments are responsible for free roaming cat management. Some use legal grey areas, as was mentioned there, as Manuela mentioned, to exclude cats, while others just rely on NGOs and volunteers to do the actual work, which is inevitably going to be piecemeal and fragmented, something that, again, we know is a bit of a challenge. So is there anything that we can do to get local governments or municipalities to take responsibility, or is there some kind of alternative? So first, Jenny, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, as you just mentioned, in the UK, we don't have government responsibility for managing free roaming cats at kind of a local or a national level. So we don't have the option of municipal support. So we have to find another way. And that is largely through charities, but really crucially through working with communities. And because we haven't had that option, we have found that actually that community working can actually empower communities to care for cats in their communities themselves. And what we know from our research and kind of the global patterns of evidence around cat population management is that actually involving and engaging with communities is absolutely key. Now, I'm saying all that, we haven't got it perfect. It's really still fragmented, and we still then have to try and target that work. But we do have examples where we have targeted a local community and actually found a shift in that sense of responsibility. So a lot of the residents in the community that the government was responsible for managing these cats, or other people were, and actually through that targeted engagement work, we shifted that view to increased sense of community responsibility. So really in the UK, animal welfare charities have been best placed to deliver that, and that really is our only option. And I think that community involvement is really, really challenging, but I think that is definitely what's needed for that long-term sustainable change, and we've had to do that without municipal support. It sounds very challenging, whoever's working about how to target that support in the right way.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. It's interesting, and I'm sure this is going to come up in some of the other challenges that we face. But a lot of people look to the UK as having solved a lot of problems, but we do have our own challenges in a different guise. Sam, I want to ask that same question to you over in Sri Lanka, and obviously your experience with your work. Is there anything that you've been able to do, or that people watching can do to engage with local governments and to get that responsibility?
Morning. I think that firstly, it's actually an issue that is also the same in dog population management. So I think with municipal councils globally, there is a reluctance to take on both dog and cat population management. If you're fortunate enough, as we are in some areas, to already have some engagement on dog population management, or if there are groups locally that can be a way in for you. It can be very challenging. Cats are often forgotten. If you are working in a rabies endemic country, you could also try looking at the One Health angle and talk about cats as potentially being a reservoir species for rabies. So there are some ways to try and get the local municipality to consider cats. I think also if there are dog population management programs working, we know from our own experience that as you reduce the number of dogs, there will be an increase in cats. So even if your organisation is not specifically working with dogs, but there are organisations that are, I mean, we actually work with both species, it is also worth speaking to those organisations if they already have funding in place, whether there is an element at the end that can be looking at cats, because there will be an increase in cat population as roaming dogs decrease. But it isn't an easy one.
If it was an easy one, we probably wouldn't be having a panel session about it, right? No, that's a really good point, and it's such an interesting perspective, the link between dog and cat population management. There are some significant similarities, but also we need to be really, really conscious of the differences as well. But thank you so much for that, Sam. Ursula, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it is really, really complex, and it really depends where you are with your organization. Whether you work just with cats, like Sam already said, if you have already the connection with the dogs, then you might be working already with the municipalities. But I think we also, especially with cats, we often have these smaller rescue organizations who want to do the trap, neuter, release, and kind of just fell into this. They just saw the need, somewhere on an island maybe, and there are just too many cats, maybe somewhere on holiday, and you might have never wanted to become involved in this, and suddenly you find yourself surrounded by cats. So what do you do? And I think for this, I would just say to have this open conversation within the municipality or your local area and government, and just lay out, just understanding what are their expectations, what can they help with, what are they absolutely against, and approach them first and have this open conversation to just sort of lay the land and just see what is possible, and just to manage expectations on both sides, but do go in with information, resources that about what Jenny said about population management, what is out there, how can this addressing the overpopulation help the community, and what is the positive outcome of it. So do go in prepared and then see where you can help each other possibly.
Such a valuable point there, and I think it's something we've talked about a lot at International Cat Care. This idea of we work in cat welfare, all of us here work in cat welfare, and trying to impose our passions and ideas and the things that we feel are important. The municipality isn't necessarily going to care about the things the same way that we do, even if you have somebody that's on board with it. But that's not the important thing, right? The important thing is to meet somewhere in the middle. It's that communication, like you said, Ursula. It's that compromise what's important to them and important to us, as long as we achieve the same goals. And it's really, really important to be able to do that. Thank you so far for the panel. Already we're off and running with a really great conversation about that first challenge. Let's jump into the next Vox Pop and see what the next challenge is that we have to confront.
My name is Emma Perry. One of the challenges that we've encountered in the early stages of our community cat population management program is apprehension from feeders and carers to make contact with us through fear of repercussions in terms of fines, having the animals removed permanently, or backlash from the wider community.
Thank you, Emma, for that. Another really resonating challenge there, something that I think everybody's going to be familiar with, the need to engage with feeders to be part of the solution to cat population management. And so how do we do that? Sam, I want to start with you on this one. How do you build trust with the feeders who often work under the radar? Is that an issue that you've experienced over in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, I think it's something that we do need to be really aware of, that the feeders and sort of local cat carers are incredibly passionate about their cats, and they are to them their cats. They often have a lot of learned experience where they have been ostracized by society, perhaps harassed by the police or other people for caring for these cats. So I think, first of all, we need to make them understand that we're not their enemy. We're there to help them. We're on their side. We care about the cats as well. We also find that because they are so passionate about the cats, that the more transparent we can be about the services we're offering. We have our staff have videos that have been made and taken at the cat clinic, so they can show the cat feeders how the cats will be trapped, how they'll be removed, where they'll go, the vets that will treat them, how the sterilization works, so that they feel more confident handing the cats over or helping us get the cats into cat carriers. And I think also by providing them with a phone number or WhatsApp that they can contact us. So when they come to us with problems, we're helping them. They can see I've found that all the cat feeders are very, very keen on having the cats sterilized. They're very keen on having the cats vaccinated. They're very aware of these things. So I think it's understanding that they may have had some very negative reactions or interactions with people in the past, and very much showing them that we're on their side.
I love that, Sam. It's the transparency and the openness there that really seems to be making a difference. That's incredible. I mean, I think it's something that we're all familiar with. And Stacey, I'm sure this resonates with you as well. I wonder if you have any thoughts on this particular one.
I certainly do. I think the relationships with the folks that are caring for our cats in the communities are extremely important, and we need to work hard to engage them and help support them and elevate their status in the community. And, bringing them into the whole process of helping with assisting with catching the cats. Sometimes we have the feeders on the right side of the street and the trappers on the left side of the street. We want to bring them together so that they're working together collaboratively. So in the States, we're now doing a lot of trap training and developing our feeding stations in a way so that they can be used as traps when we need to assist the cats, either for sterilization or for an emergency medical treatment. And so getting those feeders familiar with the tools that we use to help support and elevate the care of the cats in the community, I think it brings us together more in our problem solving, and it brings us up together rather than in a separate silo.
Again, another really important reflection on that. Thank you so much, Stacey. I don't know if Ursula or Jenny or Nat, you got any further thoughts on this one before we jump into the next challenge? Nat, yes, love to hear from you.
It was just a sort of thought as we were discussing this. From the veterinary side of things, often when these animals are presented to you in a clinic for neutering, your point of contact may be more on the charitable or NGO side of things. But often it's an important question for us as veterinary professionals to just ask, if there's an issue, if I'm finding something within the specific animal that I'm concerned about, before we make decisions about what the outcome are, who do we need to talk to and involve? Are we just talking to our contact at the charity? Is there someone additional that would also, need a phone call for a bit of discussion about whether or not this is an option to manage this cat back in the community, or if we need to maybe talk about a euthanasia decision at this stage? But it is important for us as veterinarians to recognise that sometimes it is a tripartite relationship. It's not just us in the clinic and the charity that's bringing them in. There is sometimes a third person involved, and we really should make sure that we respect that relationship.
That's a really, really important point. I'm very curious, and again, going back to everybody that's watching this, love to hear in the chat, not only where you're from, but, are you a vet? Are you a feeder? Are you somebody that's involved in cat population management? Really love to hear where your perspective on these things is coming from, because as Nat said there, we all play such an important role in cat population management. Thank you to Emma again for that box pop. Thanks for the answers that we've had on that challenge. Let's jump into challenge number 3 and the next vox pop.
Hi, I'm Chicha. I'm based in Indonesia. So the biggest challenge that we face here when it comes to managing the free roaming cat population is just the sheer number of cats on the streets. I think everybody cares, a lot of people care, but not everyone can afford sterilization, and not everyone has access to subsidized sterilization programs. And there's also the lack of coordination between the government and the community who cares about cats. And I often also see cat abandonment. So there's still a lot of people dumping cats on the street. And not only does it cause suffering to the cats, it also adds to the overpopulation issue that we face.
Thank you, Chicha, for that really huge challenge, and surrounded by all of those beautiful cats as well in that video. And Chicha's going to be joining us live in the next panel session, so it'd be great to hear her perspective on the next session. So this is really a challenge that encapsulates all of the issues that often work against effective cat population management. And so with that in mind, who would like to suggest what can be done in regards to a solution for this? Let's throw that over to you, Jenny. Solve this for us, please.
Okay then, yeah, that's fine. It's such a complex issue, and that coordination is absolutely key there. So in a UK context, something that springs to mind massively is targeting and really concentrating those resources, because it can be really difficult when you've got a massive population where to start. So thinking about targeting is key. So in the UK, we know that unowned cats are completely linked with people and in communities that are kind of financially stretched. And it's in those areas where people are deciding, should I feed my cat or do I feed myself? Do I neuter my cat? Do I get my weekly food shop? And so subsidised neutering, which came up in that fantastic question there, it would be absolutely key for some of these communities, but also really thinking about other barriers to neutering. And I think there was a mention of abandonment there, and how do we support cat owners, those links between owned and unowned cat populations. And actually thinking about, we can't do everything. So at Cats Protection, just for a bit of context, if you don't mind there, at Cats Protection, we support neutering of all cats, so owned cats, unowned cats, cats in shelter. And actually last year, we neutered over 160,000 cats in the UK. We supported the neutering of that, either through our TNR or subsidised neutering programmes. Amazing, really important for the kind of individual lives of cats and for people. But we're here today talking about population management, right? And unfortunately, we're not seeing that impact on our shelters. There's still a high demand for our shelter services. And actually, our owned cat neutering rates are still declining, which is a massive concern. So I really would love more conversations around kind of how we target resources effectively. We can't do everything. And actually within that, if we can't be targeted or coordinated, we have to have really realistic discussions around expectations, because I do see people say, oh, these projects have failed. And it's really heartbreaking because people are working tirelessly, and there's a huge aspect of, people's well-being that is associated with cat population management. So, yeah, sorry, I've just broadened the actual issues there, but coordinating and targeting, but equally, thinking about what's the realistic expectation from this as well to support the people that are working on the front line in these areas.
Yeah, sometimes the burden is on ourselves, right? You know, because we have these expectations. We want to solve these problems. All the problems we're talking about today are super aspirational, big issues, and we set ourselves sometimes up to not achieve what it is we're going to do because we want to help so many more animals than we actually can. And sometimes, as you said, it's targeting it, scaling down, look at those successes when we can. So important, and something that, again, I think everybody's going to be familiar with. I want to open this question up to Nat as well. I'd love to hear your perspective on this quite all-encompassing challenge.
Yeah, and I think we know it's not a challenge that's going to be sort of solved overnight. Many of us have been involved in this field for more years than we'd like to count, and we can see that we've made some wins in some areas, but there's still a lot of areas that maybe we haven't tackled as well as we would like to. Definitely from my observations over the years is we have often small groups working in maybe similar geographic areas, often doing very similar things, but not coordinating and collaborating their resources together. So definitely the more collaboration that we can have, the more people come together, pool resources maybe in certain areas, or agree how they're going to spread the workload. You know, maybe one group is going to focus specifically on this area that's affecting cat population. This other group's going to focus on this area. And some of them may be saying, okay, we're going to run the subsidised neutering scheme. Can you guys handle the TNR side of things? And trying to divvy things up can be exceedingly helpful. Definitely, again, based on observation, often when we have multiple small groups, there may have been historic reasons where maybe they were collaborating and coordinating. Something happened, they had a bit of a falling out, and suddenly we've got two groups doing very similar things. I think sometimes we have to take a full step back and recognise that we usually have a lot more in common than we have with differences. Maybe as volunteer groups or charitable groups, there are some small differences. But in the grand scheme of things, we're always trying to achieve the same outcome. We're trying to improve cat welfare. And sometimes we have to accept that we've got differences and maybe agree the areas that we can collaborate on and work together on. And maybe sometimes just put some of maybe historic grudges aside and try and collaborate together. Because unless you've got all the money and all the resources in the world, you're not going to be able to do everything. And so looking to see what you've got that you can really achieve well within your group, make that your area of focus. If there's an area of collaboration that you all agree is really important for your geographical area, maybe then working together to pool resources and create a new resource where you can achieve a specific target. Say, if there is a lack of low-cost neutering, can you pull together to create a neutering resource? And it is really important that people have those strategic discussions and work together as much as they're able to.
Thank you, Nat. I think, yeah, spoiler alert, I think we're going to be mentioning coordination and collaboration more than once on this. But yeah, really valuable. And Stacey, I'd love you to jump in on this as well and give a perspective from the US, perhaps.
Yeah, and you know, I'm going to jump back on Harry's stream and go upstream a little bit more on that one, because I totally agree with targeted. So you need to make sure that you're covering all components of that proactive as well as the reactive work in your target area. So many of our cats and mainly kittens are what are impacting the volume of intakes into our shelters. It's about 50% of kittens 6 months and under, at least in the States. And so if you can go and find the source of those kittens geographically and identify that as your target area and build a spay-neuter TNR as well as spay-neuter for owned cats in that target area at certain strategic levels, you'll be able to basically significantly reduce the number of kittens that are going into your facility, and you'll actually create what I call a kitten-free zone in that community. But you need to work those strategic numbers. The reason projects fail is you're just not doing enough volume. And so you really do have to become a spay-neuter capacity builder, creator, even if you're just, I say that in air quotes, just a TNR group, you are also a capacity builder. And that's what's so critically important for our success, is getting to that target zone, socially vulnerable areas, and then creating those appropriate strategic numbers that within 3 to 5 years, you can create significant impact.
Thank you, Stacey. That's, again, such an important point. And I know, we've talked about working strategically a lot, and that came up in last year's iCatConnect. And I know that can feel very daunting for some people, this idea of being systematic and strategic. And it sort of takes away from the work that we feel we're doing, which is just helping these cats. But it's so important to kind of demystify what we mean by being strategic. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. It's just being organized and coordinated. Ursula, you want to jump in on this as well?
Yeah, just maybe very, very quickly on a practical point, because I think a lot of us, we work very practical. So maybe you have a volunteer who is really, really eager and always comes in with that extra neuter and this extra trap neuter release. And sometimes it may be a bit like, oh, it's too much. And so, but this is actually a resource that you might be able to just redirect slightly and say, where are you getting this cat from? And rather than getting it from this neighborhood and from that owner or from that backyard, to just maybe guide this person and say, we're focusing on this area. Are you able to just put your focus on there as well? And then sort of redirect your volunteers, or really communicate with the volunteers and say, where are you thinking is the next hotspot? Coming back to what Jenny said about being targeted and strategic, and just to really practically maybe utilize that energy that some of these volunteers bring, and just to say, okay, where are you finding all these cats? Should we as an organization maybe retarget or refocus that way? Or to say, could you focus on this area? That might be just a practical tip.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, and links back to the previous challenge about feeders and engaging with them and bringing them into being part of the solution. Another great challenge from Chicha. Thank you so much, Chicha, for that. And panelists, for some very enlightening answers. Let's go on to challenge number 4, and Vox Pop number 4. Let's see what that is.
Hi, I'm Jo. I work at Battersea Dogs and Cats Home, and I think one of the biggest challenges that we face when it comes to managing cat populations is just the amount of misinformation that's out there for owners when it comes to, breeding, neutering, the age at which cats can get pregnant, how many litters one cat can produce over time, and just not knowing where to turn for information. So often they may rely on social media or kind of unscrupulous sources.
Thank you, Jo, for that challenge, and your little grey companion there, who looks like one of my cats at home, for highlighting that piece of the jigsaw puzzle. Involves the demand for pet cats and the need for responsible ownership. And that, of course, means neutering. Is that always a straightforward thing? And so let me throw this one over to you, Nat, to start with.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it is straightforward. So some of those key things to do with responsible ownership, timely neutering, ideally prepubertal. If you're in a country that registers cats or has microchip databases, having them microchipped at the same time, making sure you get the vaccines in. So within that sort of, I've adopted a kitten kind of moment, the honeymoon period, I've heard it referred to. There are some just key things that we would like owners to engage in. And if they do that, then actually they've set that cat up reasonably well for hopefully for life. But whilst it sounds straightforward, sometimes it isn't. And so again, if people are looking on social media, there is this sort of global distrust now for maybe engaging more with professional advice and getting advice from other sources. Some of those messages may be missed, and so maybe that neutering isn't as timely as we would like it to be. But also we see, especially in parts of the world where maybe access to veterinary care isn't as robust as we would like it to be, but also access to affordable veterinary care may not be as robust. And so there potentially is this lag between when they would like to have some of these things done and when they're able to have this done. And that definitely can cause a problem. So In terms of solutions, obviously making people as aware as we can before they take on an animal. And again, I know that's why a lot of us always encourage people to work with their local charities, because usually all of these things are done, or that support's in place to have it done shortly after adoption. Whereas if they're getting a cat from maybe a social media website or another source, often the person that they're getting them from isn't necessarily giving them the right advice or the resources to actually help get them neutered and have that timely veterinary care performed in an early stage.
Thanks, Nat. Yeah, that's really important. You know, there's a lot of noise out there and misinformation, as we know, and it's so important for charities, all of the charities that are working on this. You know, we don't have to say it in the same way, but we do all want to be saying the same thing so that there is that consistency of messaging. Jenny, why do you think that in the UK, for example, more people last year bought pedigree cats than adopted from homing organisations and shelters, which was a piece of information that really shocked me when I first heard that?
Yeah, it's kind of a growing trend, and it seems to be a decline in the demand for like muggies, our domestic short hairs, our domestic long hairs, and they're the cats that make up the majority of our cats in rescue centres. And there's a few concerns with that. Firstly, around our cats in our rescue centres being seen as less desirable, and that has huge implications also in population management, but also the welfare implications. As some of our purebred cats may have extreme traits that kind of are concerning for other welfare reasons. And just very cheeky small plug here around that, we actually have a paper coming out later this year on that. It's very understudied in the cat population. I think we're a lot more aware of it in dogs. It's just that increased digital, generations driving this. People purchasing cats online. When you go online to get a cat, a potential owner is going to be faced with, tick boxes. What breed would you like? So the whole structure around getting a cat has changed, and social media, which also came up in that excellent question there, and around how we're kind of celebrating some traits in cats that are perhaps quite of welfare concern. What can we do? I think you said it brilliantly in terms of let's work together with the same messaging, and I think we really need to be proactive with that. It feels like as in the UK at least, especially, we're kind of firefighting these welfare concerns as they're emerging, and understanding why people are getting cats in a different way. And part of that is around our rescue and rehoming centre policies and procedures. There's a lot of variation in that in the UK at least, and I completely understand why we have those. They're there for good reason, but we need to start thinking about the unintended consequences, because people are sourcing cats elsewhere. And actually, isn't it fantastic if people get a cat from us, they get equipped with all that welfare advice, and they're setting up owners really well for cat ownership. So there's kind of conversations to be had there, and it'd be brilliant just to work as one, to be a positive voice for cat welfare and making neutering really appeal to a digital generation, trying to look at alternative ways to communicate these really key welfare messages.
Yeah, it makes a huge amount of sense, doesn't it? We are conflicted. We have so many voices on social media, whether it's influencers or celebrities or cats that people are seeing that they want to emulate. And as you said with shelters, if we're making it difficult for ourselves to, the access to cats that we want to rehome, then that's really problematic as well. This working together, consistency of message, like you said, I think it's really valuable. Thank you. For those of you that have already sent in questions and comments, the engagement has been incredible. We will get to those, or some of those at least, at the end of this panel session. I don't know if you noticed through the break, little QR codes up on the screen. Please do click on those, sign up to the Unowned Cat newsletter and engage with us. Any questions that we don't answer in this panel session will get answered in the next Unowned Cat newsletter. So please do make sure that you sign up for that so that we can continue these conversations. So really, really interesting set of questions and challenges in this first half. Thank you again for those Vox Poppers who sent them in, and for the panelists here for really thoughtful and engaging answers. Let's jump in to the next Vox Pop and the next question. Let's see what's going to happen.
Hi there, my name's Ruby, and one of the problems we face with cats in our state and country is a lack of support and training for veterinarians to perform prepubertal desexing.
Prepubertal neutering, that is a real challenge as well. So thank you, Dr. Ruby, for that one. Jenny, I'm going to come to you on this one to talk about the significance of prepubertal neutering in cat population management. You've done some really interesting modelling on what's happening in the UK, so maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, and I promise you it is fun, even though it's maths, and hopefully really highlights the impact of kind of neutering cats prepubertally. So we all know in the animal welfare sector really the links between owned and unowned cats, but it's really difficult to be able to kind of quantify that and understand mechanistically how, you know, what happens when the intervention on the owned cat population can impact other cats in the community as well. So to overcome that, we developed the first UK cat population model. It accounts for the different types of cats that owned, that unowned, the cats in shelters. And of course, these cats don't live in isolated bubbles. And like my cat Mac, you know, cats can move among these different states, you know, before they find their forever home as well. So we wanted to create something that we could use to kind of model these kinds of situations that also accounts for whether these cats are neutered and the age of these cats. And what that allows us to do is predict kind of interventions. So it's like a mathematical crystal ball. What we found was actually in the UK, owned cats are hugely influential on all our cat populations. We specifically looked at neutering. So of course, neutering prevalence, the proportion of owned cats that are neutered. If that's reduced, we get these booms, these uplifts in our unowned cat population within the model. But really interestingly, actually, if we just shift the ages that these owned cats are neutered. So in the UK, we recommend owned cats are neutered from 4 months to prevent accidental litters. And actually, if cats are neutered at 6 months or later, what we again saw was these increases in our unowned cat population. So of course, we want to invest lots in neutering, but we don't have infinite resources. So you can actually make a real difference by promoting prepubertal neutering and just shifting that age of neutering to be lower. So it's not just what we kind of do, but it's when we do it as well to be most impactful with our limited resources.
And I'm curious, the like the proportion that you said, what was you saw this kind of like drop in numbers?
Yes. Yeah, in terms of if we shifted to like 50% of cats being neutered prepubertally, there's a massive decline, a significant decline in the unowned cat numbers. It depends kind of what neutering prevalence you set, but relatively speaking, from our average population dynamics in the UK. So.
Such interesting. I mean, anybody that is interested, I would suggest you kind of look at this research because it was really eye-opening and enlightening, and such a significant change to a population just from these kind of marked things that you're doing with prepubertal neutering and focusing on the owned cat. And I know a lot of people watching this, it's going to be about unowned cat populations, but we can't separate those two things, and that there is a stream of cats coming in through the owned population, and we can't forget about those. It goes back to targeting and all the things that we've already talked about, but it's so important to recognise that. Thank you, Jenny. Ursula, what do you think in your experience about neutering kittens as young as 8 weeks and it not being that common a practice?
Yeah, it really, really is a big difference depending on the country you're working in, really. Some countries like the US are quite familiar with neutering quite early on, and now here also in the UK. But in many, many other countries, I think there is a lot of myths around the early neutering and fear related to that. Should we neuter this early? Is it bad for the cats? Does it have side effects? What about the anesthetic protocol? Will my cat become fat and lazy? And all of these worries and myths are out there. And I think it depends really if we're talking to a vet, if we wanted to ask a veterinarian to neuter just that little bit earlier, is what are their concerns, is the drug protocols they're using. A lot of veterinarians, actually what I find when I teach is that they are very nervous and apprehensive because we do care. We are veterinarians and we care about the animals. We don't want anything to go wrong. So if you are a vet and you have never done it before, or if the community vet that you're working with has not done it before, I understand that there is a reluctancy at first, but there are many resources out there that show that actually they bleed a lot less, they recover incredibly fast, and it's really lovely to see when they wake up from an anesthetic and have been neutered, and 15 minutes down the line they are playing again and they are tucking into their food. So I think it is just, again, addressing the fear of what is holding the person back of actually doing it. Is it because they've never seen it, or because other worries? Of course, there's also reputational worry, and in some countries, even the fear of being sued. But it is, I think a lot of it is just fear-based, and we have to address the fear and where is that coming from, so that we can tackle that and get earlier neutering on the agenda. Yeah,
I'm sure everybody out there, I have no doubt that in the comments people are going to be expressing their perspectives and their views on this. It is one of those issues that everybody does have their own viewpoint on, and it's really important, as you said, from a veterinary perspective, to understand that evidence-wise there are clear benefits to doing it. There are very, very few complications, if any, and the advantage of doing it is huge. But it is that fear, it is that skill set, it is that ability to do it. I mean, you've also talked about from the other side, because there's two strands to this. There's the vets, and then there's the public attitude. There's, you refer to it as the ick factor of, you know, kittens being 8 weeks of age. And I always find it interesting that, you know, 8 weeks is, I'm not sure about that. 12 weeks, borderline. 16 weeks becomes more acceptable. And we were talking about the difference of 60 days here. You know, it isn't a vast period of time that goes from what's acceptable to unacceptable. And I'm curious as to kind of your perspective on that as well.
Yeah, it is really interesting. It's when they are at this kitten stage, and I think maybe it's also a maternal thing that we think, oh, they're too little and we cannot do it, they're too tiny. And but again, it's just, and the worry associated with that, it's just a baby or it's just a tiny one. But I think the recovery is so much faster, and the blood loss is so tiny. Like it's such a fast surgery. And if I may, with Brady Care, the organization that I have founded, we will have next year the exact examples of the surgery from a cat that is in heat and a cat that is 6-8 weeks old and being neutered, and the big difference, because what we want to do is the 4 months bracket, but then life happens and kids are in school holidays, and then another month pass, and then instead of having the surgery that is very, very minimalistic and really fast recovery, then suddenly it does become the neutering where the cat is actually on heat already, and that is definitely a big difference. They lose a lot more blood, and it's not such a nice surgery, and they do have more pain, and it's just that tiny little shift of, like you say, it's just a couple of weeks difference, and it does make a big difference to the cat and the experience also they have at the vets, that they actually forget and recover very fast to then having them in heat, or worse even, they're already pregnant, and then maybe now, well, we need to let her have the kittens, and then the cycle starts again. So it's really trying to get into that and breaking that cycle before they come into heat and are more painful during surgery. After surgery.
Thanks, excellent.
Yeah.
Brady Care, good plug there. Another organisation to look out for.
Yeah.
Subtle plug. Didn't even notice. Out on Zoomland, I don't know if Nat or Sam or Stacey would like to jump in at all on this one. Sam, yeah, I see your hand up.
Yeah.
Love to hear from you.
Yes, I mean, everything Ursula has said about the surgery, absolutely agree with that. But also from an organisational point of view, we're all limited to the amount of money and resources and veterinary capacity we have. So if we have our veterinary staff or the contractors that we're subcontracting to, and they're trained in early age neutering, in a sort of a shift basis, more animals are able to be sterilised. The costs are less for the organisation. You're using less drugs. As Ursula said, there's less pain, there's less post-op complications. But when you're looking at something like Kitten Quad, which already is using a very, very small amount of drugs because you're mixing 4 drugs together, when you shift that down to around the 1 kilo cat or even 800 grams, the cost per surgery is lower. So from every angle it works. It's working from cat welfare, but it's also working for the organisational welfare. And particularly, we know that veterinary capacity in a lot of places is limited. There are more surgeries needing to happen than there are vets. So I think for everyone, just that shift down to earlier works.
Thanks, Sam. That's a really interesting perspective, and obviously links to the things that we've been talking about previously, which is about targeting and capacity and all those kinds of things. You know, you can't separate these viewpoints. Really, really interesting. Thank you, Dr. Ruby, for that question. And let's go on to the next Vox Pop and see what the next challenge is.
Hi everyone, my name's Mari Roberts. One of the biggest issues we see with cats here is that there's really low rates of microchipping and desexing, and the lack of state government coordination and national government leadership on cat management.
Thanks, Mari, and another cat there on the video showing itself. It's always lovely to see those. This is another big issue, and Jenny, you've already shown us through the modelling examples what happens to cat populations when owned cat neutering rates decline. So Stacey, I want to open this one over to you. In your experience, is it just the veterinary profession that remains the barrier with things like cost and training and accessibility and some of the things that we've just talked about, or are owners themselves generally reluctant to neuter?
Yeah, this is a great challenge and something that I wrestle with quite a bit. In addition to the work that I do, you know, in the community cat space and in the nonprofit space, I also do own two for-profit practices for cats, trying to rethink the private practice modeling for cats, because many private practices in the States really don't do much spay-neuter anymore. The large chain of 6,000 practices only does, on average, 29 spays or neuters a year. And then another one is only doing 14 a month. And so we're seeing this tremendous shift away from the spay neuter going to the large scale, high quality, high volume spay neuter clinics that were in essence set up to support the socially vulnerable populations and target areas. And now that population's getting pushed out and the general public are using these clinics. So instead of building more spay neuter capacity, we are just maybe shifting appointments around. And we, you know, private practice revenues focus more on dogs in the US than on cats, much more. About 80% of revenues relate around dog population. So we have to really re-engage our private practice veterinarians to think like a cat, to help produce scalable, high volume, high quality services, higher margin services with this training. So the Feline Fix by 5 campaign, the early age spay neuter, you know, working efficiently and effectively for cats to make it work for the private practice space, you know, as well as for us as a community to help with overpopulation of cats. So I think we have to rethink the model a little bit and re-engage our private practice clinics into this cat. And again, it's part of that elevating the status of cats and realizing, yes, there is revenue. So, you know, in the States, they've called it Year of the Cat with veterinary practices, because revenue is growing for cats in veterinary practices where the dog revenues are going down. So let's leverage that. Let's continue to grow it, because we've really lost spay neuter access in the private practice space, and we need to bring it back. This is a team effort for sure, and we need to really bring them back into the fold with the tools we were just talking about in the earlier questions.
Thank you, Stacey. It is interesting, like you said, the earlier questions, seeing a pattern here. You know, there's so much continuity between the challenges and the questions, and one interlinks and it is connected to another. And, you know, we talked about coordination and collaboration, and it's, again, another thing here. And there not being a one-size-fits-all solution, and there's multiple avenues to try and get the results that we're trying to get here. Thank you so much for that, Stacey. I don't know if anybody else has any other thoughts on this Sam or Nat or Ursula or Jenny. Yeah, Nat, I'd love to hear from you on this one.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point that Stacey was raising, because the general veterinary practice, the way we used to think about it 20 years ago, is really changing and evolving. You know, vets that did everything, and there's a lot more streamlining of skills, which has a huge number of benefits, but also, as Stacey's raised, some massive negatives as well. I mean, some of those stats around numbers of animals neutered in some of these large corporate groups are quite shocking and depressing. I think both me and Sam were like, what? You know, that is worrying. And it is definitely access to care is sometimes a massive issue. It's something that's really become highlighted to me with my recent move to working on another small island, but one in the Caribbean. And, you know, we only have 2 clinics on the island that will do surgery, will do neutering, and one of them is the university. And so our workflow is very much higher at times that the students are here compared to other times of the year as well. And definitely here it's a financial aspect for many cat owners, but also just physical logistics to get to the section of the island where veterinary care is available. And so it is tricky. Access to care is a massive issue. And if you've then got vet clinics in your local area, you think you've got an okay population of vet clinics, but they're not performing the neutering surgeries, that again is creating sort of deserts really where neutering isn't easily accessible in many cases. So it is a really concerning issue.
Yeah, very much so. Really curious to hear. We'd love to hear from everybody out there that's watching this now, your experience with this, and you know, are you seeing where you are and where you're working this drop in desexing or problems with access to neutering? It'd be really great to hear from you and get your perspectives on this. Thank you, Mari, for that challenge, and Stacey and Nat, for your perspectives on this. Let us go to the next challenge in the next Vox Pop, see what we have.
My name is Yota Kuduri. My biggest challenge when working with grassroots NGOs is convincing these teams that are exhausted and overwhelmed to invest more in their capacity building and other organizational aspects instead of the rescue side of things, through processes and tools they're not necessarily familiar with. Basically, winning the argument that saying no for a while will enable them to help more animals in the long term. On the other hand, as a rescuer myself, my biggest challenge is the lack of access. I don't drive, and we do not have municipal vet clinics, so if I need to pick up a cat and take him or her to the vet, I have to make sure that he's available on short notice and then either hassle someone or pay a taxi to get there.
Thank you, Yota, for that one. Something that we hear a lot all the time, and we actually have talked about this a little bit already, which is this idea of capacity, and that links into obviously what Sam was saying before about being strategic and being able to find the time to do one thing over the other. You know, how do we overcome this and revitalize what we know is a really overwhelmed sector? I am sure everybody watching this has, you know, come up against it sometimes, and it is, you know, it can be exhausting, and, you know, it is all of these challenges and can feel overwhelming sometimes. And so how do you find the time to build capacity and do these things that inherently feel like they're taking you away from the cat itself? That's the reason that we got into this in the first place. So Sam, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because you touched on this just before.
It's such a complex issue, and it's so important. I think the analogy that we all have to think about is you can't pour from an empty cup, and rescuers are so often an empty cup. And we are asking ourselves, we're asking our colleagues to say the one thing they don't want to say, which is no. But I think that even in the question, I think the questioner answered her own question slightly there by, we do need to say no and take a step back, because for 3 or 6 months, if you take a step back, if you reduce the area that you will work in, or you reduce the services you're offering, and you invest in that capacity, you come back at 6 months or 12 months and you have much more to offer. You will get animals through your rescue centre quicker. You'll be getting more animals sterilised. If, you know, in our analogy, we've taken on more and more vets, and we have trained and trained and trained and trained, so that now we are able to run 4 neutering teams, whereas a year ago, 18 months ago, we had 1 neutering team. But that was a conscious thing to step back and stop doing other work and to work on that alone. And it is very, very difficult. And I think we as people working in the sector have to give ourselves permission sometimes to say, I cannot do everything. I will be helping slightly less animals, but longer term, I will be able to help more. And it's really back to your original video, Harry, the upstream, downstream thing. And I think we just have to be really kind to ourselves and kind to each other, that if someone is taking a step back to build capacity, that they're not being criticised by other people in the sector for maybe closing their rescue to intake, or shutting down a service in a particular town or village whilst they build that capacity.
Yeah, it's such an important point. I think, one of the fears is judgment from other people. And if you're going to say, oh, I'm not doing this, it doesn't mean no. It just means maybe no right now or this week or something else. And we've talked about coordination and collaboration. And I know a lot of people in this feel like they're doing this alone. And you're the one that is responsible for those cats that are in front of you. But, we are a community. And we do need to work better together, because then we can support each other. And it's such a valuable message. Not easy, as you said, Sam, really, really tough sometimes, but something that we all really need to pay attention to. Nat, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one as well.
You can't work from an empty cup is a really, really good analogy.
Yeah.
If you're off sick, you're going to end up saying no if you're in hospital.
Yeah.
So you've got to not let yourself sort of get to that point. It's not easy though, because actually in doing this, there's that concern about external criticism, but also actually you do have to kind of self-reflect and almost critique yourself, which is not an easy thing to do, that sort of self-reflection, really assessing what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, but also what is needed overall. And sometimes you have to recognise that maybe you're not the right person to be doing that strategic approach. You're a hands-on person. That's where your strengths are. But then it's recognising that is where the gap is, and maybe finding someone that has that skill set. There are a lot of people that are really keen to work in the animal welfare industry or to be helping with animal welfare, but may not be actual animal people themselves, but they've got some of those organisational skill sets, and so they're happy to potentially volunteer their time to help out and maybe do some of that more strategic work for you if that's not the area that you're strong in. But it does require self-reflection, and sometimes you have to sort of step back and ask yourself, am I the best person to do this? I'm doing a little bit of this myself at the moment in my current job. I've got only a limited amount of time. There's a lot of tasks that need doing. There's things that I really want to say yes to and I really want to do, and I enjoy it. But actually, it's currently not the best use of my time. My skill set is better spent doing some of these other jobs where there's fewer people that potentially can do them at the moment, because we're a little bit short on staff. And I maybe have to, at least for a period of time, give up some of the tasks that I enjoy doing, just because, it's not the best use of my time at the moment to be doing these things. Hopefully I can come back to them. But sometimes you do have to weigh things up and decide what's best, at least for now, and what's the best use of my time and my skill set within that wider sort of strategic approach.
Thanks, Nat. Yes, it's true. It's that balancing act, isn't it? And thanks for mentioning the video, Sam. That upstream downstream thing. The point that I made in that is, it is this continuum, and we talk about aspiring to work upstream and how important that is. But not everybody's going to do it. Not everybody can do it. Not everybody should do it. So it's just about, as you said, Nat, being honest about what your capacity is and what you can achieve by doing that, and not trying to be all things to all people. Everybody has their role to play, and it's just being honest about that to yourself and to the help that you're trying to offer. Ursula, also love to get your thoughts on this one, because I think this is something that we could talk about for an entire panel session, to be honest.
I think so. I agree. I loved what we got back from Nat and you, Sam. I think it's such important points, and I think it is very, very challenging, because it is so emotional what we do. I think we really want to make this better. We are all in animal welfare because we like animals, we want to care for the animals, we want to solve a problem. None of us is here because of the money, or it's just, and it's really, really challenging. And I just also want to say to everybody out there, really, because it can be very difficult to reflect. And you're like, well, how do I do this? Where do I start? And I had this the other day, and I was just having this conversation, and I was asking, when you started working in animal welfare, how did you feel? Whether you're a vet, volunteer, or whoever you are in the organization, how did you feel? And most of the time we were very enthusiastic, thrilled to finally be there and really making a difference. But where are you now? How do you feel about what you do every day now? And do you feel that you can go home and switch off? Those are just some questions I think that are helpful to ask sometimes, and to see where you are, and listen to your own alarm bells when you haven't taken a break. Like what Nat said in the beginning, if you need to take a break, we can't work when we are in hospital, when we are absolutely depleted of all of our energy. So I think that's really, really important, just to reflect, like it was already said, and just to see where you are now, and to talk to your colleagues. I have had so many times this conversation, you said, really, you feel like that too? Sorry. And then to feel that you're not alone. I think this is maybe also the space for it today and here and now, because I see you nodding, and I think we've all been there. And I think this is maybe also the space where we can say, yeah, I have been there, I'm not feeling great, or have overdone it. And then, like Sam said, to really say, okay, let's do this, let's be brave and take a step back and look where we can improve our approach and looking after each other, because we have tried the firefighting, it's not working, not long term. Yeah. So let's try to fix the system, even if it's the small circle we're in, yeah, try to help each other.
Yeah, I love that. And it is interesting, you know, we all kind of like have our own views on this, right? We've all, you know, we always think these things, and we're we're the only ones that feel this, that think this, that are challenged by it. And then when we sit in these forums and we have these conversations, it's like, oh, you feel the same way too? How weird is that? And it's not weird at all, because we're all doing the same thing. We all have the same motivations. And I love what you said there about having that moment to reflect of, you know, look at where you are. And also, it reminds me of something I read recently, which is like, look how far you've come from where you were to where you are now, because we're always worried about what we want to do next, the animals that we still need to help. But take a moment and just go, look at what you've done, look at the animals you've helped so far, and how important and valuable that is. And as you said, which is, I think, something that we often struggle with, is it's quite a brave thing to do. And I love the way that you said that. It is quite brave to just go, no, I need to pause and reflect and work out what is the best thing to do next. Love that. Thank you, Ursula. Stacey, I'd also like to throw this one open to you as well. Love to hear your view on this one.
Yeah, and I know we have so many questions, so I'll keep it brief, but I'm going to challenge our audience and our panelists to think about delegating, giving away something once a week. That was always my goal when I ran a nonprofit for 16 years, was what do I have? And I can practice giving it away to somebody else, whether it's a small or a large, you know, task. It could be supervising a program, or it could be a small item. But just to feel comfortable with sort of losing that sense of ownership and understanding that this is an organization. It's not just about you. It's a muscle, and we have to practice it every week. And so I challenge the whole our panelists as well as the audience to just keep thinking about that. And you'll be able to really scale, batch work, all of those sort of time efficiency tips will be really helpful, but be comfortable giving things away.
Challenge accepted, I think. And also would love to hear, again, engaging with you out there on YouTube watching this live. What are some of the things that you think, you know, reflect on this for, you know, for the rest of this session, for the rest of the day? What are some things, what are some responsibilities you could relinquish? If anything appears to you now, if anything pops into your head, love to hear it in the chat, just to see how we can take this forward. I'm sure we're all going to be having that conversation and that thought later today. Thank you, Jutta, for that really pointed conversation starter, and the panel for your thoughts on this. Let's go to the next Vox Pop, see what we have next.
Hi, my name's Emma. The worst thing for me about the cat situation, and it's replicated, I think, all over the world, is when tourists come to the island, or when we find a colony of cats, we neuter them. Neutering them is straightforward, it's simple. Dealing with the cats, TNR, trap, neuter, return, simple. We do the best job we can. The worst thing for me, which is heartbreaking and makes me feel so helpless, is when the people say, we don't want the cats, don't bring them back. We have nowhere for these cats. They're outside cats. We don't have a sanctuary, sadly. And that's, for me, is the worst thing about the job.
Thanks, Emma, for that one. Something that, you know, if we haven't come across this ourselves, certainly heard about it. It's sadly quite a familiar challenge. Stacey, what advice would you have for Emma and people like her who are experiencing similar situations?
So I don't trap cats. We borrow cats. We borrow them for 24 hours, and we are just helping to prevent the birth of kittens and the suffering of kittens in the community. We're not there to alter the current environment other than reducing the fighting, the behavioral issues of unsterilized cats. So life will become a lot calmer for folks. And so usually those concerns of the folks that don't want those cats back will be reduced or eliminated anyway. But I use the language of we're just going to borrow the cats for a minute so that we're going to prevent 75% of the kittens from dying and the suffering. And so we are not there as a removal source. So there's my quick answer.
I love that, Stacey. That's great. Like just a simple change in language just kind of reframes it. Yeah, I'm going to be using that myself. I'll steal that from you, Stacey. Borrowing cats. Jenny, I'd love to hear from you from a UK perspective on this issue.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to borrow the borrowing word as well, because cats protection, our operational teams, again, you know, it's not standard procedure to relocate cats somewhere else. Firstly, there's individual welfare concerns with that in terms of are those cats going to thrive in their new location? But equally, it's not solving any issues. So, you know, we know about cat populations, and if they're there for a reason. So if you remove some, then more are likely to come in. So what our teams do is actually engage with people in the communities, and perhaps, borrowing Stacey's word around borrowing again, to really make sure those expectations are clear. Of course, there are some situations where if there's like a housing redevelopment and literally that cat's, you know, place of where they live is going to be gone, then relocation's an option. I don't know, I keep seeming to be actually raising more queries and questions, but actually an additional challenge we have on this is, and I'd be really interested to know if other people experience this too, is actually a trend in an increase in cats that come into shelters as what we assume to be pet cats, but actually turn out to be unsocialized cats that wouldn't thrive well in kind of a typical home environment. This is cats, you know, from hoarding situations, or where cats have been kept indoors for, you know, and only known one person their whole life. And actually, we're finding that we need to find more kind of outdoor homes where they get the support they need, but importantly have that kind of freedom and choice to in who they engage with. And this is more so in urban areas. So yeah, relocation used to be, you know, farms and stables, but we're having to really think about new approaches going forward, and it may also be linked to positively the rising understanding of in-betweener cats, obviously from International Cat Care, and understanding that actually not all cats will do best in a home environment, but that trend is actually increasing. It's another kind of, I'm adding another problem to deal with in cat population management, but I don't think it's my role here. But that's something we're experiencing as well in terms of different relocation kind of techniques.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, I mean, another problem, but also, you know, we've touched on a solution there, so that's fine, as long as we balance all of that. Sam or Nat or Ursula, I don't know if any of you want to jump in on this one. Nat, I see your hand up there. I'd love to hear from you on this one.
I don't think I have an answer either, but I think Jenny's raised a really good point that definitely on the shelter side of things, we're often looking for adopters that don't really want a cat. You know, they don't want the interaction that may what you expect maybe from a cat, whereas these more sort of in-betweener type of cats are often just more of a furry lodger that needs, you know, shelter and food support and occasional interaction if it's their choice. But it was definitely a challenge when I was working in shelters with some of these cats of how do you attract people to come to adopt a cat from your shelter that don't really want a cat? And I don't think I've got an answer for that, but there is a need for these people out there, especially in the urban areas where we do have these poorly socialized cats that don't really want to interact a lot with people, but still need that support.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nat. And thank you, Emma, for that. We do have some more Vox Pops. Actually, we've got less than 15 minutes left in this panel session, and I'd actually like to see some of the questions because I know we've had a bunch of them pouring in. So I'm going to look at these for the first time. I hope they're not terrifying. And we can see. Let's have a look here. Okay, so we've got. Where shall we start off? Oh, there's so many good ones. So this is one I think everybody can input in. So this is coming from North Coast Cat Rescue. We've got a large farming community in Ireland, which is a constant uphill battle to explain the importance of TNR. And it kind of touches a little bit onto the previous Vox Pop that we have there, but I'd like to dig into a little bit more and get everybody's perspectives on that. How do you explain the importance of TNR to people that either don't understand it or don't see the relevance of it to them or don't see how it connects with the cats in their community? I don't know, who wants to jump in first? Show of hands, and I'll throw it open. Ursula, thank you.
I don't know if I have the answer either, but I think where I live now, it might be interesting. In Denmark, very often it's a very pragmatical approach, and I'm often asked, why don't you just kill them all? And I wasn't quite used to that question in the beginning, but I think it might tie back because this is maybe what these Irish farmers also kind of say, just get rid of them. But I think it's then important to explain what you touched on already, Jenny, that if we take them all away, it's very likely that we are creating a vacuum with food source. And so we will just encourage, because there's not a barrier, there's not a fence around it. So cats will move in again, and then they will have more food available again, and then they will reproduce, and the litters will survive for a couple of cycles, and then we have actually amplified the problem. And when I explain it like that, it often, not always, but sometimes a light bulb goes on. So that might be one way of explaining it. And then I think the other part is what we already said about borrowing the cats, is that we won't take them away, but we will make the situation better. We will reduce the howling and the noise from the entire tomcats. We will reduce the fighting and the injuries, and we will reduce having maybe even dead kittens or the fighting and not so pleasant side of the population that is there currently. We will reduce those problems, but we will still have the benefits of them mousing and keeping the rodent population at bay.
This kind of almost goes back to that first Vox Pop and that challenge that we had, which is how do you engage with municipalities? And it's a similar thing. It's about meeting them halfway, having that open dialogue, making sure that we do that. Something that's interesting that's come out of some of the research I've done for International Cat Care, which is, we talk about how do you convince people of the importance of TNR. And one of the things that I heard repeatedly was the biggest way that people understand the importance of TNR is seeing it done effectively. you can say all the things that you said, which are 100% correct. This is going to make an impact on the cats. But sometimes just seeing a successful TNR project and the impact that they have and the evidence that shows of why this is important speaks volumes above us just trying to convince people. I wonder if that's something that Stacey or Nat or Sam have experienced as well. The proof is in the pudding almost.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that. I think that is really true, that the proof is in the pudding. We at the university here, we have an unowned cat population that kind of lives around the vet clinic, and there's about 10 of them. And I think it's a really nice thing for the students to see that, there's this group of cats. Some of them are relatively sociable in the sense that they are quite happy to have their ears scratched, and they'll usually try and steal your lunch. But just the students seeing that interaction, seeing cats living outdoors very, very happily, living their best life. It means we don't have any problems with rodents getting into our pet food stores at all at the clinic as well. So rodent numbers are very low in and around the clinic, which is great. And because here we're teaching predominantly North American students, where maybe indoor cat ownership is a lot more common. And there may be some misconceptions about whether cats actually should be allowed to be living outside. I think it's a really, really nice thing for them as future veterinarians to be seeing happy and healthy neutered outdoor cat populations. I think it's a really good thing.
Thanks, Nat. And Stacey, love you to jump in on this one as well.
Yeah, it's ironic that it's sort of a challenge for us in Newburyport, Massachusetts, when we started out with 300 cats in 1992 living on a waterfront area. And then by 2008, our 14 feeding stations were closed. The last cat had passed away. So we had a very successful trap, neuter, return program, a wonderful, wonderful model, along with then implementing an owned cat spay neuter mobile clinic, our Catmobile. And we did free spay neuter for feral cats from outside the area. That was like our gift to the others in the community that wanted to create initiatives in their towns. We were offering free spay neuter for feral cats outside of the local area. But here we had this wonderful model. That's 2008. We're now we're going into 2026. And so generations have changed in the communities. And so they really don't know what it was like to have trap, neuter, return in that area. And so it's unfortunate that cultural DNA, we now have to start reteaching it again for those pocket areas where you've got like the 4 to 6 cats, and you want to make sure you get right on that situation. So we actually see more small hoarding situations that we're trying to get into rather than like an outdoor cat population. So it's just, we're having interesting challenges of how to try and continue this TNR culture that really should just be inbred in all of us.
That's so interesting, Stacey. And, everybody's in a different stage, and, you kind of address one issue and then you have to contend with this. And it's this, when we talk about cat population management, that management word, it's this ongoing thing. There's always going to be something that we have to do, and we just have to adapt it in a different way. I really appreciate the answers on that. Thank you so much for that question, North Coast Cat Rescue. We have so many questions that have come in. There's loads. We could have like another 3 hours on all of these. We won't, but we could. This one's interesting because it touches on something that I think will be relevant to everybody, but we haven't really touched on it before. So the question here, I'm not sure who it's from, but it says, I'm in a country where donations are illegal and no funding for TNR is running. And so do you have suggestions on how I could persuade my community to put money towards the cats instead of, in inverted comma, better things or other priorities? I'd like to open this one up to Sam, to you first, actually.
Yeah, gosh, that's a really tough one. I mean, in Sri Lanka, there are issues with a lot of international payments. So a lot of the locally funded groups aren't able to apply things like PayPal to their website, which is just, quite normal to a lot of organizations. And they do raise money from the local community, whereas us as an international NGO, we tend to go outside of the country. And I think they start how they tend to do it is they network with other people that are very passionate about the cause as well. They tend to use things like Lions clubs and Rotary clubs. So I just wonder, obviously you don't know what country the person is in, but whether there are things like that. And then maybe people that have moved overseas, that have connections with companies that might have a CSR project. But I do know that it can be quite difficult. International funding isn't available to every country. But that's how I've seen small groups in Sri Lanka sort of get around the not being able to use things like PayPal.
Thanks for that, Sam. That's really useful. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts or experience on this, but I know it's an issue that's going to resonate with a lot of people that are listening. Stacey, yes, please jump in on this one.
Just make sure you've researched all the potential business models that are out there. So if there is something that you can do in a revenue generating space, that then you can have an extra margin on top and then utilize some of those services to be able to be a flex pay option. So you don't have to be a veterinarian to start a clinic in the US in all the states. And so, we created our Catmobile model, and that was a nonprofit, but you could have done it as a for-profit venture. And we were having a profit even in the nonprofit space with doing 6,000 surgeries a year. So then with that profit, you would utilize that for, other program needs. So, don't think like you have to always think about a nonprofit model. You could be thinking about a business model in another format, just arranging your margins differently to be able to get that extra cash flow to assist in the lower margin items.
Thanks, Stacey. That's really useful. And I guess, we're, as we say, we're part of this Unowned Cat community. And for everybody, and we talked about this in other guises before about, sort of like the challenge that we individually are facing. Everybody is going to be facing some kind of financial challenge, and everybody in different countries and in different guises has probably found a solution. And so, this is the perfect opportunity as part of the Unowned Cat community to share how you have overcome this. I'm sure that there are going to be people watching this and listening to this who have come up with some unique and innovative way that they've managed to raise some money that is going to help somebody on the other side of the world and go, I hadn't thought of that. Or maybe that's not perfect for here, but I can adapt it. So again, another thing to throw in the chat. If you've got experience, if you've come up with a fantastic way of helping generate funding for the work that you do, we'd love to hear about it. Something, again, that we can look at sharing so that it's available to everybody. I'm looking at the time. We have 2 minutes until the end of this panel session. I don't think we've got any more time for any other questions. Jenny, do you want to jump in just before we stop, though?
There's a bit of pressure, actually, isn't there? But I think those two last questions, both around the farm areas and also in kind of other communities about that engagement approach. It's okay not to rush in and do TNR is all I wanted to say. It's okay to take a line for what we said earlier, take a step back, engage with those communities, embed yourself in those communities. And as Sam said, in local groups and learn who key advocates could be in those communities and understand some of those barriers. And then that will be helpful instead of just immediately jumping in and saying, how do we do TNR? Like, what are their actual concerns? Because farmers could be they don't want their farm cats or that they love their farm cats and they want them to hunt. There's loads of different nuances within this. So to be kind to yourself, take a step back and take time to engage with the community and embed yourself in it.
That is terrific advice to end this panel session on. So let's have a look. What have we got to wrap this up? First of all, thank you to the panel. Thank you, Jenny, Ursula, Sam, Nat, and Stacey over in Zoomland. Thank you for watching. Thanks to Vox Poppers who posted these questions in the first place and the challenges. Thank you to everybody that's posted a question. As I said, we were only able to answer a couple here. All the others are going to be answered in the Unowned Cat newsletter. Thank you for engaging and watching this panel session. I hope you found it as interesting as we all have. Hopefully these conversations will carry on going. We're going to break for lunch now, 45 minutes, and then we will be back in the studio. And when we come back, we're going to be looking at the challenging and emotive issue of end-of-life decision-making. It's going to be a really, really interesting conversation. We've got a fantastic panel for that. So in the meantime, enjoy your lunch, stretch your legs, and hope you enjoyed it so far. And we will see you back in 45 minutes.
to all our wonderful colleagues around the world has helped you to realise you're not alone, no matter what challenges you face. Did any of the challenges discussed by our panel resonate with you? Did you feel energised by all the ideas or overwhelmed at the enormity and complexity of cat population management? Any small steps you can take will make a difference. What action will you take after today to make an even bigger difference to the cats in your community? Take a moment to reflect.